So first, let's talk about the crawl aspect of things. We really want to focus on folks getting quick time to value through their GRC implementations. I think there's this preconceived notion, if you will, that in order to get value from a GRC program or a GRC implementation, that it's going to take, multiple months or oftentimes years before that ROI starts to come through. So what Agile has been able to do, through our years of experience implementing GRC programs, through working with folks in a variety of industries, building accelerators, have really, focused our first phase on delivering foundational value in a 6-week period of time. You'll see on the left-hand side here, reference to a few Agile, what we call applications under the umbrella called ARC, which is Automated Regulatory Compliance. So we have a industry content offering, if you will, which is the first one here, where we are bringing to the table over 500 industry laws, regulations, mandates, and standards that we've harmonized together to seed a risk register. And that risk register is really focused on both compliance requirements, integrating that with risk. So if you go to store.servicenow.com, you'll actually see the over 20 plus applications under the ARC umbrella, if you will, that we have to seed, if you will, GRC to get folks up and running with their various mandates and obligations. Kind of then from there, helping to sustain, the changes that exist both internally with your own policies, as well as with, what the regulators are saying and the different mandates that come down. We have built sustainable workflows that complement ServiceNow's existing regulatory change management capability, which we call Agile ARC regulatory change management workflows, which allow you to onboard and offboard new laws and regulations, pinpoint policies that need to be updated, as well as identify the assets and the controls as well impacted by those changes. So that's that closed loop process to sustain your risk and compliance foundations. And then ultimately, everyone's seeking to get reporting from their GRC program. And oftentimes we need to have compliance specific reporting. Earlier on, I mentioned about, harmonization, which is really important to get you to a point of being able to perform once, test once, and satisfy many. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. But we also need a way to unwind that and demonstrate, how are you complying with a specific mandate or policy, or law that you need to. So we built a compliance reporting capability that allows you to generate reports by specific obligation or mandate. As you'll see on the next slide, this is how we help folks, get on that journey, if you will. And you'll see kind of on the upper kind of right, if you will, where we talk about executive dashboard. I mentioned before, everyone seeks, reporting coming from a GRC platform. Within 6 weeks, you're getting executive level reporting and a dashboard, generated from ServiceNow that we've actually had CISOs and leaders, take to their boards to tell a story about their risk and compliance posture, at the organization. So really the 6-week journey that we take folks on starts with those content foundation. That's an Agile ARC content, if you will. We'll select an industry specific content pack. We'll select the various mandates and authority documents that are most important to you. We'll onboard your own policies and standards as well to integrate that into the framework, if you will. We'll understand your risk methodology, and we'll essentially work through a process to, identify what the inherent and residual risk values are and seed the risk register. So it's a 6-week journey. We've done this dozens and dozens of times to get folks up and running here. And it's really the foundations, if you will, that you'll be able to build on for the rest of your journey.
I did have one question. When you see that executive dashboard right there, is that something that you guys have done previously? Is that an example, or is that built in the tool?
It's both, actually, Cliff. So we'll have this data is all generated, and Jay's going to show you in a minute exactly how that same dashboard is generated inside of ServiceNow, even with more sophisticated dashboards and heat maps and things like that. We also then provide a PowerPoint version for you to tune, if that's something that you need to include in an executive level, presentation deck going up to the board. But all the data you'll see exactly, sit inside of ServiceNow and be generated.
All right, I like it.
No, thanks, Cliff. No, I think that's a perfect segue, because now let's go show you how we bring this to life, if you will. These are a few of the dashboards. You know, you actually will see the one here on the left where you have the high and the medium high and the red and the yellow circles, if you will. You know, that's really the ServiceNow version of that same dashboard you saw on the previous slide. But we'll have Jay bring these to life now in the system and show you how we get folks up and running in 6 weeks.
Very good. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I want to quickly start by looking at a dashboard we've pulled together here. And what this dashboard is showing us is the compliance that we have for each of our kind of key laws and regulations for our example organization here. So we're able to quickly see for ISO 27002 as an example, that we're 59% compliant. We've got a little work to do as it relates to non-compliance, nearly 16%, and then partial compliance here with 21%. This is a great way for us to start to leverage the data that we're going to be gathering through control attestations, risk assessments, diagnostic surveys, and the like. So we're able to determine whether a control is compliant and translate that against key laws and regulations so we can see. This is nice for us to see, how is the organization doing at large? We can take it a step further and say, what are we doing for our financial application? And now we can put a filter on it specifically to say, hey, this is a critical application with the organization. ISO 27002 or NIST 853 are really key regulations for this individual application. How do we stand? And business owners really like this because it gets them a very targeted view of their world, their application. It helps them understand where they stand from a compliance perspective. I want to quickly show you how we get to this data. So it starts with all the different laws, regulations, and best practices that may be applicable to your organization. Brian mentioned we maintain a library of over 500 different laws, regulations, and best practices, and have made them available in industry-specific packs. In our demo here, we're looking at 295 different laws, regulations, and best practices. And we're going to look at one in particular, NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And as part of the subscription, we provide some high-level details, including a description and a URL to the verbatim source section, so you can go read that on the site of truth, in this instance, the NIST.gov website. Each authority document or law or regulation is decomposed into a series of citations. And for NIST CSF, it's been decomposed into 109 different citations. When we look at a citation, we provide the verbatim language right out of that law or regulation in an unedited format other than having been decomposed. This decomposed section is mapped to an individual control objective, and this control objective is part of a common framework of risk and control requirements. This piece here is talking about security monitoring and what we need to be doing as an organization. And when we look at the control objective, this is where it all starts to come together and we start to drive towards that assess once, test once, satisfy many model. Within our control objective, we scroll down to the bottom quickly here, we can see that there are 184 different citations that have something to say about the topic of security monitoring. That includes some internal policies and standards, CIS, NIST, ISO, and on. This information is what ultimately feeds into that initial dashboard we saw earlier. We're leveraging the data from our instantiated controls to determine where we're compliant and not on an individual, law and mandate level. The other side of this coin is we were looking at a control objective here, and this would be applied against our operating environment as controls. But the other side of the coin is risk. And we have a library of risk statements that have also been defined and come as part of our content. These risk statements include a statement of risk, as well as a default inherent risk ratings that we typically see within organizations. But as part of that crawl phase, we work with you to tune these to your organization. So these inherent impact and likelihoods and residual impact and likelihoods are aligned to your operating environment. Ultimately, the output of all of this risk information is the ServiceNow version of that executive dashboard that Brian was showing us a moment ago. we're able to use all of the underlying risk information to determine how does this roll up into a common risk taxonomy. So we have a series of risk categories and risk topics that help group all of those risks into high-level topical groups. And we can then look at inherent risk, residual risk, both quantitatively and quantitatively for the organization to get that management level export. So this information would be fed into that PowerPoint slide and helps management understand where investments are paying off and where we may need additional resources to better improve our risk posture. So with that, I'll go ahead and start the Q&A. I think we've got a lot of topics to discuss there. Perfect. And
yeah,
thanks, Jay. That was great.
Already, Jay. All right. So first, have you done any work with state and local governments? And if so, how have you dealt with state-specific regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. We worked with a number of state governmental agencies and helping them stand up their program and their risk register. So in addition to making sure that those state-specific laws and regulations are part of their library, we've helped them build very targeted exports. So if they need system security plans, as an example, we've worked with them to help build those out so they're getting the documentation and the reporting they need out of the tool at the end of the day.
Yeah, and going to follow up on that. This is one I know. So when you said compliance reports, so one of the things that we've struggled with in the past, just being as transparent as possible, is it's easy to get an overall compliance rating for NIST content, for example, or HIPAA, high trust, whatever. Are you able to break out your ARC content to specific audiences or specific departments, divisions?
We can, for each of those individual laws and regulations, we can run a targeted report. So if we need to generate an ISO 27002 report, it'll pull in all of the verbatim language from that source, as well as all the related controls and control test information. So we're leveraging all of the good work that's being performed in the system and generating a very audience-specific, regulation-specific export that can be used as part of audits or regulatory examinations.
Right. So for example, if there was a high-level state government and they wanted to see PCI on one hand, they wanted to see HIPAA on another because maybe they have a system that does that, then they have another that's focused on NIST and then another that's focused on ISO, you could create those 4 dashboards?
Absolutely. Not only can we have those dashboards, but we can give you a very verbose reporting of what the law and regulations requiring of you, what you're doing today. And we can even apply another filter to say, well, I need it for this particular department or division or piece of my business. So there's a lot of reporting capabilities in terms of how we can slice and dice that data to make sure you get the reports and extracts you need at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely huge, just because that's one of the other things that happens at the crawl stage is a lot of times it's getting organizational buy-in from different parts of the organization. A lot of times either IT will buy the product or risk will buy the product or compliance will buy the product, and then they focus on their needs as opposed to going into the others. So being able to break out that content really, I mean, that's absolutely huge.